one of the most electrifying players in American football, Michael Vick.
Michael Vick.
Michael Vick.
Michael Vick. Michael Vick.
You have just seen Michael Jordan of the NFL.
Police raided a farm Vick owned in Virginia and uncovered an illegal dogfighting operation.
Allegations of hanging, shooting, body slamming, even electrocuting dogs to death is a record-breaking NFL superstar, a former #1 draft pick, losing a $120 million contract over dogfights.
I think he'll be remembered as the person who was involved in dogfighting.
First, I want to apologize for all the things that I've done and that I've allowed to happen. So I will redeem myself. I have to.
He's one of the most influential figures in modern NFL history, a transformative talent and human highlight reel who reshaped the quarterback position before disgracing himself in shocking fashion off the field. From Virginia Tech to Atlanta to Leavenworth and back to the NFL, his legacy is as complicated as it gets. This is the story behind Michael Vick. Michael Dwayne Vick was born June 26, 1980 in Newport News, Virginia, specifically in the impoverished and crime-ridden East End of the port city. The third of 4 children born to Brenda Vick and Michael Body, both of whom were teenagers at the time, young Michael was raised in a housing project where gang violence, drug dealing, and even dogfighting were regular occurrences. However, there was one thing that offered the boy, who went by his mother's surname of Vick, an escape from the traumas of home life: sports, and specifically football. Vick's father had gifted him a football when he was 3 years old, and it wasn't long before the game and making it to the NFL became Michael's singular focus. Fortunately for him, he was something of a prodigy. Like his father, who went by the nickname Bullet during his playing days, young Michael had blazing speed, but he also had a cannon for a left arm, the kind of arm that demanded he play quarterback. And even though his profile was highly unusual for the position, Vick, a black, left-handed thrower who was also invariably the fastest player on the field, soon became a must-watch talent and one of the most intriguing young quarterbacks in the country. As a 3-year starter at Warwick High School, Vick threw for more than 4,800 yards and 43 touchdowns, while also racking up more than 1,000 rushing yards and 18 rushing touchdowns. Vick was a freak of nature, a game changer even more gifted than his cousin Aaron Brooks, another talented quarterback from the East End who had recently gotten a scholarship to Virginia and would later go on to enjoy a solid NFL career. And like his cousin, Vick also opted to play his college ball close to home, choosing Virginia Tech despite an aggressive recruitment effort from Syracuse. And it was there, less than 300 miles from Newport News, that Vick transformed from a gifted curiosity into a national sensation. As a redshirt freshman, Vick led the Hokies through one of the greatest seasons in school history in 1999. With Vick's dual threat ability giving opposing defenses fits, the Hokies fielded the best offense in the nation that year, averaging more than 41 points per game. For his part, Vick set a freshman record for passing efficiency while also rushing for nearly 600 yards and 8 touchdowns. And oh yeah, Virginia Tech didn't lose a game, going 11-0 to earn their first ever appearance in a national championship game. And although the Hokies came up short of a title, Vick certainly did his part against Florida State, at one point helping his team erase a 21-point deficit in an eventual 46-29 loss. For his efforts, Vick finished 3rd in Heisman Trophy voting, tying what was then the highest finish ever by a freshman. His potential, it seemed, was otherworldly, unprecedented. If Vick could do this at the game's highest level, not only was he destined to become a Pro Bowler, but he could fundamentally reshape what a quarterback looks like. Of course, not everyone was sold on Vick, but the believers far exceeded the skeptics, especially after he turned in another eye-popping season as a sophomore. And after only 2 years at Virginia Tech, Vick's stock was so high that he decided to forego his final 2 seasons of college eligibility and declare for the 2001 NFL Draft. Right then and there, Vick essentially became a lock to go first overall, and his historic showing at the draft combine only reinforced that. Well, enter the Atlanta Falcons, an inglorious organization that desperately needed a franchise quarterback. Although the Falcons held the 5th overall pick in 2001, they were resolved to make Vick their new franchise cornerstone. So the day before the draft, the Falcons traded their first-round pick, third-round pick, and a future second-round pick to the San Diego Chargers for their first overall selection, setting the stage for a new era in Falcons history.
With the first selection in the 2001 NFL Draft, the Atlanta Falcons select Michael Vick, quarterback, Virginia Tech.
This was a monumental selection, and not just for Atlanta. Vick was the first black quarterback to be drafted first overall, a watershed moment for the NFL. But for all the excitement surrounding Vick, especially after he signed the biggest rookie contract in NFL history, he wouldn't have an immediate impact on the Falcons or the league. As a rookie, Vick played sparingly behind veteran QB Chris Chandler, who had led the Falcons to an improbable Super Bowl berth in 1998. The rookie started only twice for a mediocre Falcons team, though he made his game-changing potential abundantly clear in those limited opportunities.
Michael Vick, the rookie, with his second offensive series. And the left-hander, elusive, tucks and runs. Watch out, 50, Vick at the 40, Vick at the 30, Vick lunges to the 21-yard line.
And after Chandler left for Chicago that offseason, Vick's training wheels came off. In 2002, the number 1 pick became QB1 in Atlanta, and in his first year as a starter, Vick turned in a season that not only made history, but marked the dawn of a new prototype for quarterbacks. In his first game as Atlanta's starter, Vick put the rest of the league on notice. He threw for more than 200 yards and a touchdown, and ran for another 72 yards and a touchdown. He was truly a singular threat, and defenses were mostly powerless to stop him. Over the course of that season, Vick threw for nearly 3,000 passing yards while rushing for almost 800, 173 of those coming in an early December overtime victory over the Vikings, establishing a new single-game record for a quarterback. His efforts helped Atlanta field the 5th best offense in the NFL and propelled the Falcons to their first winning season and playoff berth since 1998. And the Falcons were victorious, by the way, in the first postseason game of the Vick era, beating the Packers by 20 on the road before falling in the divisional round to the Eagles. But although Atlanta still had a ways to go, with their electrifying new quarterback, who by the way earned a trip to the Pro Bowl and finished 4th in MVP voting, it felt like the sky was the limit. Unfortunately, however, their 2003 campaign was scuttled before it even started. That preseason, Vick broke his right fibula in a game against the Ravens, sidelining him until week 13 of what was ultimately a lost, forgettable season. But Vick promptly got himself and Atlanta back on track in 2004. That year, under new head coach Jim Mora, Vick reclaimed his spot as the league's most headache-inducing QB. He ran the ball more frequently and more efficiently than he had in 2002, while continuing to keep defenses honest with his arm. All told, he threw for more than 2,300 yards while rushing for 902 on a staggering 7.5 per carry. Ultimately, Vick's brilliance earned him another Pro Bowl nod, a second-place finish in MVP voting, a spot on the cover of Madden 04, plus a 10-year contract extension that made him the NFL's highest-paid player. Meanwhile, he also led the Falcons to one of the best seasons in franchise history. Atlanta finished 11-5 that year, earning their first NFC South title since '98 before making it all the way to the NFC Championship game. With only 2 full seasons under his belt, Vick was already a superstar, on his way to becoming a franchise icon, and potentially one of football's all-time greats. But while it may have seemed like Vick and the Falcons were knocking on the door, right on the verge of potentially winning a Super Bowl, that 2004 season actually marked the pinnacle of that era of Falcons football. Vick himself continued to dazzle over the ensuing couple seasons, earning another Pro Bowl nod in 05 before becoming the first QB in NFL history to reach 1,000 rushing yards in 06, but the Falcons floundered. They finished at 500 in 2005, then put up a losing record the following year. And if there remained any optimism about a bounce back in the wake of that 06 season, it quickly went out the window, along with Vick's reputation and ultimately his freedom. In July of 2007, following a months-long investigation, Vick was indicted on federal charges relating to his involvement with and sponsorship of an illegal dogfighting ring.
Would you at least like to proclaim your innocence?
Like I said, I won't talk about the situation right now, and when the investigation is over, then I'll be more than glad to answer any questions you have.
At Bad News Kennels, which had been operating for years out of a 15-acre Virginia property owned by Vick, dogs were forced to fight against one another for the purposes of gambling, often to the death. And poor-performing dogs were subjected to all manners of grisly executions, from electrocution to drowning to hanging. Ultimately, the indictments were as shocking as they were revolting, and they brought Vick's football career to a screeching halt. For his involvement with Bad News Kennels, Vick faced up to 10 years in prison. In the end, however, Vick accepted a plea deal that resulted in a 23-month prison sentence, And on top of that, an indefinite ban from the NFL. Months removed from being one of football's most visible superstars, Vick was a pariah. A convicted felon staring at almost 2 years behind bars in Leavenworth, Kansas. He would soon declare bankruptcy as well, having forfeited his salary, lost all of his endorsement deals, and with millions owed to creditors. It was, and remains, one of the most precipitous falls from grace in sports history. But Vick vowed to redeem himself. To that end, he met with the president of the Humane Society during his time in prison and committed to working on a program steering inner-city youth away from dogfighting. Since his release from prison, moreover, Vick has worked as an animal rights advocate. Ultimately, though, Vick served his time without incident and was released from prison after only 18 months, getting let out early for good behavior. By that point, however, a 29-year-old Vick had missed 2 full seasons. Plus, while he had paid his debt to society, he remained suspended from the NFL. And many animal rights activists seemed determined to ensure that he remained barred from football indefinitely. It was far from guaranteed, in other words, that Vick would be allowed to resume his NFL career. And irrespective of what the league decided, there was also the question as to whether any team would even want him with all his baggage and after being away for so long. Even the Falcons weren't interested in bringing him back, which team owner Arthur Blank was quite public about. However, after determining that Vick was genuinely remorseful, NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell did indeed conditionally reinstate him, giving Vick the opportunity to resuscitate his career on the eve of the 2009 season. Unfortunately for Vick, however, there wasn't much of a market for his services. In fact, 26 of the league's teams expressly stated through one representative or another that they weren't interested. But as Week 1 drew nearer, one of those teams had a change of heart: the Philadelphia Eagles. Thanks to the lobbying effort of franchise cornerstone Donovan McNabb, Philly decided to take a shot on Vick. Not to be their starting QB, of course, or even a traditional backup, but to be a versatile weapon that could be deployed a number of different ways on offense. It probably wasn't what he was anticipating, but Vick was back in the NFL, much to the chagrin of various animal rights groups, many of whom protested outside Eagles games. But for all the furor his return inspired, Vick was mostly a non-factor in 2009. From his Week 3 debut onward, Vick attempted a grand total of 13 passes and ran the ball 24 times for 95 yards in a dozen games. His only meaningful contribution that season actually came in the playoffs, when he connected with Jeremy Maclin on a 76-yard touchdown pass in the Eagles' wildcard round loss to Dallas. As inconsequential as he was in 2009, though, Vick's second act in the NFL was about to take a dramatic turn, one that thrust the disgraced QB back into the spotlight. See, ahead of the 2010 campaign, the Eagles traded McNabb, the most decorated QB in franchise history, to Washington. Their new QB would be Kevin Kolb, and Vick would be his backup. Except not even 2 quarters into the season, Kolb suffered a concussion, leaving Vick to run the Eagles' offense. And he was ready to prove that he still had it. The same quickness, the same elusiveness, and the same passing ability that once made him the game's most electrifying player. After taking over for Kolb mid-game in Week 1, Vick ended up completing 16 of his 24 pass attempts for 175 yards and a touchdown. He also racked up 103 rushing yards. And although the Eagles came up just shy of a comeback, Vick's vintage performance that afternoon was a sign of things to come. The following week, he threw for 284 yards and a pair of touchdowns in an Eagles victory. The week after, he threw for 3 touchdowns and added another on the ground in a beatdown of Jacksonville. And while a rib injury suffered in Week 4 sidelined him for 3 straight games, Vick was no worse for the wear when he got back on the field.
First play from about the 12, and there is Vick, as you talked about, John, rolling and launching downfield for Deshaun Jackson, who accelerates, caught the opening play, and all the way for a touchdown! 88 yards!
From Week 9 onward, Vick averaged more than 277 passing yards per game, another 61 rushing yards per game, and ran for 8 touchdowns. During that span, he also posted a touchdown to interception ratio of 15-6. And despite missing several games that year, Vick's 2010 campaign was arguably the finest of his career. He set personal bests that season in passing touchdowns, completion percentage, and QB rating, while also recording a career-high 9 rushing touchdowns and averaging 56.3 rushing yards per game. The Eagles, meanwhile, went 8-3 in Vick's starts, helping them to their first NFC East title since 2006. And although Philly ended up losing in the wildcard round to the eventual Super Bowl champion Green Bay Packers, Vick had done more than enough to earn himself Comeback Player of the Year and a new 6-year, $100 million contract from Philadelphia. Once again, despite the grievous errors in judgment that nearly cost him his career and irreparably stained his legacy, Vick was one of the NFL's superstar quarterbacks and highest paid players. As improbable as it had seemed when he was incarcerated, Vick was back on top, and in the process, he'd found his way back into the hearts of at least some football fans. However, unfortunately for the Eagles, Vick's remarkable 2010 campaign, and the contract it led to, marked the high point of his second act in the NFL and the beginning of the end for a controversial legend. Yes, Vick enjoyed a solid season in 2011, setting a career high in passing yards while throwing for 18 touchdowns, but his passing efficiency dropped off from the year prior, and he wasn't nearly as productive running the ball for a suddenly middling Eagles team. Then, despite getting off to a strong start in 2012, a midseason collapse by the Eagles had many Philly fans calling for the team to install rookie Nick Foles as QB1 over a clearly declining Vick. Eventually, the Eagles obliged. Vick played only one game after leaving with an injury in Week 10, and both his drop-off and the team's struggles compelled the Eagles to restructure Vick's contract at season's end. It was becoming increasingly clear, in other words, that Vick's days with the Eagles were numbered. And after another injury-marred 2013 campaign in which he was clearly outplayed by Foles, who ended up going to the Pro Bowl, Vick's time in Philly came to an end. So too did his days as a starter. Vick wasn't ready to hang it up following that 2013 campaign, but the only opportunities available to the 34-year-old were as a backup. So, in 2014, he served as a backup to Geno Smith in New York, starting only 3 games for an atrocious Jets team. He then spent the following season as a backup to Ben Roethlisberger in Pittsburgh, again starting just 3 games. Even at that point, Vick wasn't ready for retirement, but after receiving no job offers and ultimately spending the entire 2016 campaign at home, he finally decided to call it a career, but not before signing a one-day contract with Atlanta. And although he left the game with a complicated legacy, and in some people's eyes, as an irredeemable figure, there's no denying the imprint that Vick had on both the record books and the evolution of the quarterback position. To this day, Vick still has more career rushing yards than any other QB in NFL history. He also owns both the single season and all-time records for yards per rushing attempt. And it was Vick, the 4-time Pro Bowler, that ultimately served as the model for the modern quarterback. That's an athletic quarterback, a mobile quarterback, and yes, it's a black quarterback. Without Vick, there's arguably no Cam Newton. There's no Russell Wilson. There's no Lamar Jackson. Vick was a pioneer, full stop. And while his tremendous influence on the game will always be clouded by his mistakes off the field, there's no question that few players in NFL history were as simply unforgettable as Michael Vick. Thanks for watching. If you like this video and want to see more content like this, hit that subscribe button.